Good evening. My name is Fiona Branton, and I'm president of the Harvard Law School Forum. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Tonight we're very pleased and honored to have with us Sheikh Yamani, the former minister of OPEC. Introducing Sheikh Yamani tonight is Professor Frank Vogel. Professor Vogel is presently the Ezra Ripley Thayer Lecturer on Law here at the law school. He's currently working on his LLM, specializing in Islamic law. Professor Vogel has been involved with the Middle East for many years in several different capacities, including as an attorney. He's known Sheikh Yamani since 1981, since when the Sheikh sponsored Professor Vogel's research in Saudi Arabia and opened up access to Saudi Arabian courts and scholars for Professor Vogel. Professor Vogel is currently teaching an introductory course in Islamic law, in which Sheikh Yamani has been a guest lecturer these past couple of weeks, and will teach a seminar on modern Islamic commercial law and banking law in the spring. I'm pleased to present Professor Vogel.
Thank you, Fiona. His Excellency Sheikh Zaki Yamani is well known to all of you. He was for 25 years the Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And of course, over that 2.5 decades, he had an immense influence. He's perhaps one of the most influential people of our generation. He was, of course, instrumental in the formation of OPEC and in a number of so-called energy crises. But I would like to talk to you a little bit about another aspect of him that is not known. For example, how many of you do know that the reason why he is called Sheikh is because this is a title accorded to him because of his learning in the religious law. He was born in Mecca. His family is descended from the Prophet Muhammad. His grandfathers for many generations were renowned as legal scholars. His grandfather was the renowned Sheikh of the Mosque of Mecca. His father was the head Qadi of the Kingdom of Hijaz, which is the western portion of Saudi Arabia, in the early days of the Saudi state. He says, as he says, he grew up in a house that was full of law and talk about jurists and law. His only early education included education in the traditional way in the mosque, the Holy Mosque of Mecca, where he attended seminars on topics of law and religion. Then in a more modern mold, he broke the mold that had been followed by his ancestors, and he went to the University of Cairo to study law, and eventually got his bachelor's in law in 1951. At the University of Cairo, he studied with the renowned scholars of that time, who were traditional scholars, but at the same time were seeking to bring a new accommodation between the traditional Islamic law and the modern law. Then in a further break, he has come to the United States to study. He earned a degree at New York University, and then in 1956 he graduated from our law school here, earning the LLM and degree. Well, on his return to Saudi Arabia, he opened the first law firm in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. He began with friends a newspaper. He started a law review. He began to teach. One thing led to another. His writings and his education, his activities came to the attention of the Viceroy of Hejaz, Crown Prince Faisal. He was soon a Minister of State in 1950. Anyway, in 1956 he became the Minister of Petroleum. The rest, of course, is history. I'll skip that. More recent history, in the last 3 weeks, he's been with us here at the law school as a distinguished visitor. He has been teaching Islamic law, and he's been teaching in negotiation. At my request, tonight he will speak on law, on Islamic law and on Islam. And in recognition of the uniqueness of this opportunity, he has spoken so many times on oil and economics. I think we should fully exploit this special chance. I think it's the first time that he will have spoken in public in English on Islam and Islamic law. So if we could concentrate on those tonight and keep the questions also germane to that, I think we can make better progress. And then if we get distracted into all the other aspects of this man. So please welcome with me Sheikh Zaki Yamani.
Thank you, Professor Vogel. Ladies and gentlemen, first, it's a real pleasure for me to come here and talk. I did it before, but I talked about oil. And it's not deep in my heart. And this time, my good friend, Professor Vogel, told me, listen, this time you're not going to talk about oil. I said, all right, how about the situation in the Gulf, the Iran-Iraq war, the problems we have over there, and you are now involved in it? He said, no. I said, then how about the situation which might come in the future, the struggle between the two powers about the energy problem, and the Gulf and the importance of the Gulf? Again, he said no. And I have to obey. Not only this, he told me, you're going to talk about Islamic law, you will answer questions, and don't you ever answer a question if it is not related to that subject. I love dictators. And here we are. But I think the subject about Islam, its civilization, the legal system, the past, the present, and the future will be of some interest to you. You hear every day about this Muslim revival. Those people who are now started to move, and maybe they form a danger and a threat. I'm sure you are interested to know something about those Muslims and what's going on there, how they think, and what will be the future as far as you are concerned. With the Islamic movements, with the Muslim revival, with the importance of the Muslim world. You know, it's a huge area occupied by the Muslims. They own in their lands more than 75% of the proven reserve of oil, and oil is very valuable to everybody. And it is an area with very vital strategical importance to the whole world. There are Muslims under a Muslim flag in Muslim countries, and there are Muslims in areas ruled by non-Muslim states. There are Muslims in Russia. It might be interesting for you to know that in the end of this century, early next century, out of every 5 Russian soldiers, there will be 3 Muslim soldiers. It's a problem not for you, but probably for your visitor next month. But is it really a problem? This is what I'm trying to find out with you at the end of my talk. I will do my best to make it as short as possible, because what I really want is to get some questions from you and answer them to the best of my knowledge, as frankly as a man could be. Now, what is Islam? I assume not everybody here knows what is Islam. The word Islam means submission to the will of God. That's the general meaning of it. So if you submit your will to the will of God, you are a Muslim. And in the Quran, Moses was a Muslim. Abraham was the founder of the religion of Islam. And anyone who submits his will to the will of God, then he's a Muslim. Then, of course, in its recent meaning, since the time of Prophet Muhammad, Islam is a religion which came through him with his book revealed to him, which we call the Quran, And the essence is still the submission of will to the will of God. So you just rely on Him and feel at peace with yourself. That is the main meaning of Islam as a whole. And Islam is an extension of the two previous religions, Judaism and Christianity. A Muslim cannot be a Muslim unless he believes in the Holy Bible, the Old Testament, as a holy book, and in the New Testament as a holy book as well. He has to believe in all the prophets, starting with Noah, Abraham as the founder of the religion of Islam, as we believe, in Moses, Jesus. So, in that sense, Islam is the continuation or the last edition of those religions the way we believe in it. Even what came in the Holy Bible is binding on the Muslims unless it is changed in the Quran. Otherwise, it is binding on us. Now, this is the general meaning of Islam and the general relationship with the other religions. Of course, history did not prove that very much. We had wars, we had the Crusades, and so on, but this is not religion, this is mostly politics. According to the religion, a Muslim is obliged to defend the mosque, the synagogue, and the church. They are equally divine, sacred, and important, if he is a good Muslim, of course. But politics can cause some Muslims to attack synagogues and burn them, or attack churches and burn them, exactly as it does with some Christians who might attack mosques and burn them. But what is this Islamic civilization? Well, of course, so many here, I'm sure, they know that the Muslims established a civilization which is unique in itself, which contributed to the Western civilization you have in so many fields, in science, in mathematics, in so many areas. You still carry the Arabic words for so many scientific fields. Chemistry is an Arabic word. Algebra is an Arabic word coming from the name of the man who founded this algebra. And it's not only that. The civilization is there, as a matter of fact, as Father Gavin told us one day, that the very word of university is taken from the Muslims. In the old days, the mosque, which we call Jami', is the place not only to pray, is the place where you sit and have seminars. And they used to teach mathematics, astronomy, religion, law, everything. So your ancestors in Rome, they looked at it and they imitated that. And they called it exactly the same Arabic word translated into Roman, universitate, which is the university today. So the place where we are sitting there, the name of it, the concept, is coming from the Islamic civilization. But what are the main features of this civilization? First thing which is unique about it is that we know the date of birth of this civilization. There is no other civilization on earth that we know exactly when it was born, whether the ancient ones or the new ones, except for this civilization. The date of birth started with the prophet becoming a prophet until he passed away for 23 years. He came with all the foundations and the elements of this civilization. So we know for sure the date of birth of this civilization. That is something unique about it. Another thing which is also unique about it is that it is based on an ideology, not on a race. All other civilizations we know about it, whether Chinese, Persian, Egyptian, European, the Western civilization we have, a Hebrew civilization, it's all based on a race, except this civilization. It's a set of ideas and principles which came with Prophet Muhammad and people from all over the world who joined in this ideology. They formed the Islamic civilization. This is in itself an advantage or a disadvantage, because if you have a race behind you, you support this civilization. But here there is no race. The Persians, they contributed so much, as well as the Arabs, the Turks, the Europeans, and the Indians all over the world. The civilization has a third character, which is really also unique in a way. It is based on the law. This religion does not really concern itself with your relationship with God. No. It controls and governs all aspects of life. Your relationship with your neighbor, with everybody who's living with you in the community, relationship with the ruler and with the masses. Everything is controlled. It's not only that, it is a complete code of conduct in life. Everything. The way you drink water. As a good Muslim, you don't drink it with your left hand. The Prophet said that. You drink it with your hand. Right hand. And you feel better with that. Kind of discipline. The way you walk, the way you talk, you're concerned about those living with you, the affection you have. It is deeply planted in your soul since you were born in that society. Everything. When you sneeze, there is something you have to say and the others will answer you. When you walk, the way you walk, when you enter a room or a mosque, when you go to bed, everything. It's your social behavior is completely controlled by this religion. In a way, it is fascinating. And it's not imposing on you. You feel happy doing it. You feel you belong to something. This is what the Muslims have in mind. It might sound a little bit strange to you, living far away from it, but this is what it is. So that legal system, the Islamic legal system, is something very important in this civilization. And this is what I want to talk to you about, maybe a little bit more than what I said generally speaking. This Islamic law, we call it Sharia. Sharia is the source of water when you go to get water. The road to get the water. That is the source of life. This is Sharia. Sharia is what came in the Quran, the rules, as it is provided for in the Quran, the Holy Book, and what the Prophet said or did during his lifetime. We call it Sunnah. These words are a little bit strange for you. Sometimes I will repeat it. Sunnah means what the Prophet said or did during his lifetime. This is the divine law, the origin of the Islamic legal system, what we call it Sharia, which is binding on every Muslim. But then the bulk of the Islamic legal system is not only in the Quran or the Sunnah, what the Prophet said or did, it is in the work of the jurists. From the day the Prophet passed away, during the first 30 years of the Islamic state in the city of Medina, and thereafter. And this Islamic legal system went through various phases and stages in the history of Islam. Of course, the preliminary phase was the time when the Prophet was living. Then when he passed away, there was another phase, his followers interpreting this law, trying to apply it on so many new cases, until that group of people disappeared, and then new generation started doing more and more interpreting the law. But how do they interpret the law? There are certain ways and means to do that, certain methods to do it. First, they had what they call it ijma', consensus. In that limited society in Medina, there were not really so many. If they all have a consensus on something, then that is also a new source for Islamic law. Then sometimes they have a new case, and there is a similar rule on a similar case. They apply this on the new case. We call it qiyas, analogy. And there are so many other ways and means to apply and interpret the existing law. I don't want to waste your time with it. It might be a little bit boring. Not all of you are lawyers here. They had a main source for legislation. They call it masalih mursala, which means the public interest. The public interest of the society is something very important in Islamic law, Islamic civilization. And therefore, anything which can fulfill the interest of the community, it is the will of God, and therefore we have to do it. The public interest. Of course, if someone is studying Islamic law, he will find that the scope of public interest was narrow, then became bigger and bigger and larger and larger. Some jurists, they say, all right, we apply the public interest. If there is any slight relationship between that interest and what was said in the Quran or the Sunnah. Others will tell you, no, even if there is no relationship, as far as it does not contradict with a provision in the Quran or the Sunnah, then we apply the public interest. Others, they go a little bit further and tell you if there is a contradiction between the public interest and what it requires, and between a text in the Quran or the Sunnah, we can find our way to limit the scope of the application of what was said in the Quran or the Sunnah, one way or another. And they have also their own ways and means to do that. There is those who said even if there is a strong contradiction between the two, we stop the application of what is provided for in the Quran or by the Prophet and apply what the public interest requires. Different views. This is something which makes the Islamic legal system really so dynamic and alive, because it is changing over the years with the different environments, different circumstances. People are different. It could be applied in the small villages in the Arabian Peninsula. It was also applied in cities like Damascus and Baghdad. It was applied in Spain, in India, in Persia, all over the world. And it changes from one place to another. I hope by now you understand that there are two different categories of Islamic legal system. The first one, which prevailed during the preliminary period, the lifetime of the Prophet, and the 30 years of the first Islamic state in Medina, that is the divine Islamic law. We all believe that this is something coming from God. We have to abide by that. Anything after that, which is the work of the jurists all over the Muslim world, is not really binding, is not a must for a Muslim to follow the opinion of this jurist or the opinion of that jurist. He has to choose for himself, and the state can choose for itself what is suitable. And therefore, the bulk of the Islamic jurisprudence does not have a divine character. It's not a religious law. It is the law, man-made law in that sense. However, it has a religious background. We have to understand this. Because if you are a Muslim and you care about your religion, you are in love with God, you don't want to make him angry, mad at you, all right? Then God told you, for instance, honor your pledge, one of the verses in the Quran. If I make a contract with someone, I cannot breach my contract as a Muslim. Why? It has a religious background, the law of morals. It is very strong in Islamic law. That is the religious character in the law. But otherwise, the law itself is so dynamic, so changeable according to the requirements of the society, and it has to be as such yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This is the opinion of almost all the jurists, that they wrote about the subject, and they are not very rigid. So we went through certain periods in this Islamic jurisprudence. After the preliminary stage came a period in the 2nd century, which is the 8th century, your century, when what we call it the various school of thoughts started to emerge. We have two groups in Islamic law and in Islam as a whole, the Sunni and the Shiite, you call them. In the Shiite, you have also different schools. You have the Jafari, you have the Zaidi. These are the main schools anyway, there are more than that. And in the Sunni, there are 4 major schools of thoughts: Maliki, Hanafi, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. They differ in their way of interpretation. I mean, the difference is not really a religious difference. Some people, they take more interest in the public interest, like the Maliki. Others, they feel shy in the beginning. They don't want to embark on something unknown. They want to stick to the old provisions. And therefore, you have all kinds of opinions. Sometimes within the same school of thought, you find 3 different opinions, 4, 5 different opinions on the same case, the same problem. Those are the various school of thoughts which emerged in the 2nd century, your 8th century. Then Islamic law started to grow, the Islamic jurisprudence, until they wrote down most of the books on jurisprudence. For those who can read Arabic, and they had a chance really to study this, they must be fascinated. It is unbelievable. We have a witness here, someone who studied that. It is fascinating to see a man 1,000 years ago writing about antitrust law. Or yes, or about so many important problems that we have today, bringing ideas which are so liberal, even in our yardsticks today, and with our mentality today. And this is fascinating. They were really great jurists. And a jurist in the old days was not a man of law only. We have those jurists interested in astronomy, in chemistry, in other fields of sciences, in music. A man like the Farabi, a great scholar, a great philosopher, a great jurist, he was a great composer. And he used to sit down in the mosque to teach his students something about the law or philosophy or astronomy. And at the end, when they are very tired, he will take his lute, we call it oud, starts playing something of what he composed recently. These are the types of jurists we had in that period. Then after 5 centuries, when Islamic jurisprudence really reached almost the peak, the Muslims, the new jurists, became so fascinated with what was said, and they decided that from now on we stop thinking of new ideas and new laws. They closed what is called ijtihad. Ijtihad is the effort to discover or legislate the law. So they said from now on we'll be satisfied with what was said, and they stopped. That was the beginning of the deterioration of Islamic jurisprudence. It continued until sometime during the Ottoman Empire. There they felt that they have to codify the system. And they wrote the law based on the Hanbali school of thought. They call it Al-Majalla. It is until today known, and I think if someone had a chance to study Al-Majalla, he will see that this is a wonderful system, a real code. It's not different from the code of Napoleon. I mean, it is different in some of the rules, but it is a very advanced legal system. And this is based on one school of thoughts. There are, of course, some other efforts to codify the system. Just recently, there is a new movement that some new jurists, they like really to get some new ideas, new rules and regulations which can control certain areas which did not really were known in the old days, like banking problems, the contradiction between the law provided for in the Quran, prohibiting interest, we call it riba, and the new economical system based on the banking system we have today. Insurance, we did not have insurance in the old days in the Arabian Peninsula or even after that. All these new problems, we have to find solutions for it, and they are really hoping to put life again in this system. Go back to the old days which means 9 centuries ago, and do what they were doing. This is one feature of what we call it the Muslim revival. You talk about the Muslim revival in the sense of what you hear about it. People cling, some terrorist activities, you hear noises, and you think this is all what's going on. But in reality, this is not all what's going on. There is something very strange happening. All of a sudden, we have some Muslim movements happening at the same time in Indonesia, in Morocco, in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Pakistan, in Iran, in Iraq, everywhere. But the reason for the Indonesian movement is completely different from the reason behind the Moroccan movement or the Iranian movement or any other movement. So many different reasons. But the question mark which I have in my mind, and you must have it also in your mind, why is it happening at the same time? Why? I might offer some answers, but maybe you can think about it and offer some different answers. I think, in my own ideas and opinion, that the Muslims who were subjected to so many injustice from the West during the colonial time, and who felt so bad and so sad for the continuous injustice they see in the Arab-Israeli conflict. They felt that the West did something wrong to them. So the first step they did is to look to the other camp, the enemies of the West. They went to Moscow. And this is why in the 50s, maybe even the 40s, 50s, and the 60s, so many Muslim states became Marxist or at least socialist. That was the trend in most of the Islamic states all over the world. But they discovered that they did not, or they do not find a solution for their problems in that system. As a matter of fact, in 1968, I was giving a speech like this in the American University in Beirut about the main feature of Islamic law. And I called that movement, at that time we didn't have an Islamic movement. It was all a movement toward a socialist trend in our part of the world. I called that, this is a psychopolitical anxiety among the Muslims. And I said it will fade away. I even predicted that the next step is a Muslim revival. The Muslims will try to find within their own shop the answer to their problems. And this is exactly what happened. So I am of the opinion that probably because of the injustice, whether it is inflicted in the past or the present by the West, or the social problems they have within their countries, lack of social security or whatever it is, they have to find the answer and the solution at home. And this is what they are trying. And so many of those who went back to Islamic legal system were fascinated, because one feature of this legal system is the communal character. The community is above everything. And the social justice in Islam is really something so advanced when you study it and when you know about it. The law of property and so many other areas of law is based on society first, then the individual. Giving the individual all the dignity and the freedom, but society is first. And therefore, there are so many movements in the Muslim world. Some of it is now in a form of a revolution. Carrying weapons, fighting. Whether it is a wrong war or a right war, they think this is what should be done. That's their Islamic revival. Others, they start some terrorist activities. They make noises as well. This is what you hear about. But they do not represent the bulk of the movement, which you don't hear about and you don't know about. The bulk of the movement is either a silent, passive movement. But it is worth noticing and watching. I tell you something. 20 years ago, if you go to a mosque, especially during the holy month of Ramadan, that's the time we fast, you find those who go to the mosque and pray are between the age of 40, 60 or 80, and old people, grown up, already past their youth, and few in number. Now, you go to the mosque, the old people are a minority. Very strange, really. You find young people and you look at them, most of them are carrying PhDs from this country, or masters, educated in the West, coming to spend hours and hours meditating and praying. Why? A question. You might answer that. I gave my opinion. But they are becoming more religious. Not only in Saudi Arabia, all over the world. In Israel, the state where the Muslims there do not have any real contacts with the outside world. We know right now they're filling the mosques all of a sudden, going and praying. What is it? Who told them to do that? But they're doing it. And the ladies, you go to these universities, whether they believe in it or they don't believe in it, they put something on their head, covering their hair. It's a sign, it's a signal that there is a movement. It is passive in a way, but it is there. And this represents the bulk of the society. A huge number, large percentage. Some of them, they go deeper into Sufism. But there are also other movements in the Muslim world. Those who are studying Islamic system, trying to think, trying to be active in the society, in the same manner the early Muslims were. Help the poor, help the sick people, go and visit them in their homes. Real social activities. They're doing it because they discovered that this is more important in Islam, in the religion, than going to a mosque to pray. This is the group who are not aggressive nor passive, and they're growing in number. And in this area you find Muslim thinkers who are studying law or science or whatever it is, and they're trying really to revive the movement about Islam and Islamic legal system and Islamic civilization. So for someone like you, probably never heard about Islam except from the New York Times and the Wall Street and the Boston Globe or whatever it is, and the problems of those Muslims carrying guns, and you don't know what it is. This might really represent tonight a new window for you. A new window to tell you that Islam is not that, something different. It's not an enemy for you. It's not a threat. If you know how to deal with it, how to understand it. If you want to deal with it, you have to understand it first. And to understand it, you have to know what it is, the true picture. Islam is not really what you know about cutting hands, stoning people to death. It is far different from this. It is the social security and the social justice for mankind. You have to understand it and understand the way, the philosophy behind everything that we have. I'm sure I will have questions about polygamy tonight, about cutting hands, about these harsh punishments. And what is the beauty of this system, you will ask me. And all these things which I hope will come from the audience so we can discuss it together and see what it is. I did not embark on the political aspect of the subject, but I want you to yourself ask the questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer whatever you want. I took much more time than I planned to take because I want more questions and more answers. Thank you very much.
including how we drink a glass of water. It's dynamic and has this potential for change. How can it be brought to reduce the war between Iraq and Iran? Why can the principles which are so important on the little things, is there some way in which those principles can bring people who share the same fundamental religion to find some way other than killing the 100,000 people who died in that conflict already?
Well, to start with, the war, in my opinion, is not an Islamic war. The reason behind it probably is much deeper than a religious difference. Iraq is not a religious country, and the relationship between Iraq and Iran has a special character, so to speak, with so many differences not necessarily derived from religion. But if you want a religious answer, an Islamic law answer, there is a text in the Quran which says, may I recite it in Arabic and then translate it to you in English. وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمْ فإن بغت إحداهما على الأخرى فقاتلوا التي تبغي حتى تفيء إلى أمر الله فإن فاءت فأصلحوا بينهما بالعدل وأقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين. Now I translate, though it's difficult. If two groups of believers start fighting, try to conciliate. But if one of the two refused that conciliation, fight them until they obey the word of God. And once they obey, bring them together and find the solution. And be fair and just, because God loves those who are fair and just. Now, so we wait until we start applying that. It seems that the American administration is trying to implement that law coming in the Quran by putting some pressure on our brothers in Tehran, so that it's not, you don't have to fight by a weapon, you can fight by other means, so that they will accept to sit down and make peace. That is the Islamic law solution for this. Thank you.
An American company just was fined several $1 million as a result of their participation in the Arab boycott of Israel. I'd forgotten all about the boycott until I read that article. I'm wondering, what is the current status of the Arab boycott, and what is your prediction regarding its application in the future? Mm-hmm. And do legal remedies exist for foreign nationals in the, let's say Saudi Arabia, but in any Islamic country that are adversely affected by the boycott?
Yeah. Well, of course, the boycott, the principle itself, is not provided for in the Quran or the Sunnah. We don't have any provision. So it must be a new concept in its nature and character. So we cannot call it Islamic as such. I can tell you that the pioneer in this concept, the country which really applied this concept in a very beautiful way, is the United States of America. So you are the teacher in that, and I think the Arab countries are trying to learn from you. Now, as you know, And unfortunately, until today, we don't have peace in our part of the world. So they're trying to apply all the means by which they put some economical and financial pressure on the state of Israel. And this is how they have the boycott law prevailing in most of the Arab states. But this is a passing phenomenon. The problem is not the boycott. The problem is the lack of peace in the area. The minute we can reach a peaceful settlement, we can live in peace in that area, all these phenomena we have, whether it is boycott or otherwise, will come to an end. So there is no Islamic answer to that. And whether you pay a fine of $7 million or more, this is a matter of administration and contemporary law, not derived from Islam, mostly coming from the United States.
But are there ways for American companies that are adversely affected by the boycott to protect assets or to sue in court?
Back home?
Let's say in Saudi Arabia?
No, you cannot, because you cannot sue in Saudi Arabia against the laws of Saudi Arabia. I mean, they will apply the boycott laws, which is a regional law. It's not a Saudi law. It is applicable in so many Arab countries. So if you suffered any damage because of that, you don't go to a Saudi court. You should go to another court.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say about the question on Iran, Iraq. I mean,
Pardon?
Can you use the microphone, please?
first, about the question on the Iran-Iraq war. I mean, I've spent quite a bit of time in Ireland, and to call the conflict there a conflict between Protestant and Catholic is sort of missing the entire point. Well, maybe it's true in some vague sense, and no doubt the same is true in Iran and Iraq. But I wanted to ask about, it seems that there have been a few cases now where the Sharia has been applied to non-Muslim minorities who did not like it. I'm thinking of Sudan, maybe in the future Malaysia or Nigeria. I wonder if you had any comment on that, on how the law would apply to minorities who did not wish to be affected by it.
Well, first comment is about what's happening in North Ireland. Of course, unfortunately, though God ordered us to be peaceful and lovable, whether we are Jewish, Christians, or Muslims, but in the name of God, we are killing more than in the name of the devil. Anyway, when we come to the minorities in a Muslim state, a non-Muslim in a Muslim state must have a special status in certain areas related to his religion and what is allowable for him. For instance, drinking alcohol is forbidden in Islam. So all Muslims, according to this law, are not allowed to drink alcohol. If they drink, they have to be punished. I mean, if they drink in public. And wine or spirits has no intrinsic value in itself. However, from the early days when the Islamic State started to be so big, like the Abbasi state in Baghdad, the judges, Imam Abu Hanifa and the others, said wine, though it has no value for the Muslims, it has a value for the non-Muslims. They can make it. They can sell it to each others. And if they come to the Muslim judge has to render a judgment on the basis that this wine has a value and it's not forbidden. These are the rules in the early days, 100 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad. When it comes to areas where they themselves do not believe that this is allowable, I mean other types of crimes, then they have to be subject to the general rules. Now, we have a problem right now, the problem of the harsh punishments in Islam, which might be the only reason, because otherwise everything else is really beautiful. In this society, one of the opinions which we read about recently, not recently, in the last 10-15 years on the subject, they say, why don't we go to the old concept of criminal law in Islam? The old concept of criminal law in Islam is based on the idea that these harsh punishments are hypothetical, not to be implemented. It has to be there to frighten people. That is the idea. The judge himself is forced by the law to put words in the mouth of the accused so that some doubts about the crime will be created. He has to put words in his mouth. Once you have some little doubts, then the judge is obliged to apply other punishments, not the harsh punishment. So it is his duty, and what I'm saying is what the Prophet said and what the Prophet did. It is his duty to do that. So if we are not more Muslims than the Prophet Muhammad himself, we will apply that. And I think the Muslim minorities in the Sudan, especially the non-Muslim minorities in the Sudan, in Malaysia and elsewhere, and even the Muslims themselves, can find some solutions in the society. But the problem is that we are not really thinking as we should. Thank you. So.
I'd like to ask an oil question.
A what?
An oil question.
Oil? If he allows me, he said. he said. He said to me, if you start answering oil, then you get all the questions oil. Maybe after we leave, I will be more than happy to spend some time with you and answer your question, if this satisfies you. Okay. Sir.
Could you ask him to use the microphone?
Okay. The lady said use the microphone.
Excellency, since you are not answering a question about oil, I should rephrase my question differently. You spoke about Islamic revival. How much do you think the oil price increases and oil revenue increase of member countries of OPEC, which constitute the core of Islamic world, has affected the fabric of their economy and their life, and has contributed to this kind of revival?
Yeah. I really spent some time thinking about this question before coming here to see to what extent there is a link between the revival and the oil revenues. Now, the oil revenues and not in the hands of all the Muslims and all the Islamic states. It was in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, some other oil producers in the Gulf, to some extent Nigeria, and not Indonesia because it's a huge population, and Algeria to some extent. But a country like Egypt, Syria, and the others, their share in that huge revenue was minimum. Now let us come and examine the revival, if any, in these countries. Let us take Saudi Arabia. I think I know what's going on better than what I know about other countries. A huge wealth came right away. Everybody was able to multiply his money in sometimes 1 month or 2 months through real estate transactions. You make fortune. It's so easy to get millions in that country. What does this mean? You become more religious, adhering to the law of Islam, go to mosque and worship and meditate day and night. This is what happened. People became rich and became religious. Whether this is a self-mechanism in a society which is religious by itself, and they saw the wealth coming, and they saw people starting using money to gamble and to drink and to have good time in the nightclubs of Europe and elsewhere, they resented that, and it's a self-mechanism. They went back to their origin. It could be. See what happened in Saudi Arabia? The masses became religious, either in a passive manner or somewhere in the middle. There are those who occupied the mosque, but that's not the passive, that's the violent way. I don't know how you can relate this to the money. Maybe it's a reaction, it could be. But come to Iran. Iran, I think the revolution in Iran was not a byproduct of the money which came as much as it is the attitude of the late Shah against the religion, against the religious establishment in Iran. He wanted to destroy their power, the mullah and the ayatollah, and he started attacking them. Then it happened, and the masses, they were against it. So the reason there is not the oil money coming to Iraq. And of course Iraq is a different case, and they're at war. But the other countries, the Islamic revivals started in Egypt before any other country. That's the Muslim Brotherhood, from the early 40s until today. And it has nothing to do with the Muslims. I assure you, sometimes when I sit by myself, I try to find any link. There might be some indirect link. It could be, as I told you in the case of Saudi Arabia. But I don't see really a direct link as such between the oil revolution. It was supposed to lead to something different. Ready?
Your Excellency, I was wondering, what would the perfect Muslim state, the form of government, what would it be? Would it be a democracy? Would it be a monarchy? What would that be in Islam?
Yesterday, my last class in Islamic law was about this subject. There is no well-defined constitutional system in Islamic law. But there are general principles which are considered a must if you want to form an Islamic state. One of those principles is to choose the head of state through special procedures on his own merits with certain qualifications based on his knowledge and experiences in public life, administrative, law, and political. The second thing is what we call it shura. The description of the Muslims in the Quran, and shura means consultation, the translation of the word. Surah, there are pieces in the Quran. Each piece, whether it is 5 pages or 10 or 20 pages, different sizes of pieces, we call it surah. There is a surah called consultation. That's the title of the surah. The description of the Muslims are those who pray, who love God and fear God, who are good in the society for the welfare of the society, and those who have their affair of the public concern done and ruled by consultation among themselves. That is one provision in the Quran. There is another provision in the Quran. Even the Prophet himself, though we believe he was a prophet, receiving his instructions from God, but we also believe that he was a human being. We also believe that he was a political leader. And in his capacity as a political leader, he was ordered in the Quran to not to do what he has in mind. He has to do it through consultation with the people in his state. It was a small state. So that second principle, consultation, is another main feature of an Islamic state. Now, of course, you don't have an institution as such provided for. You can do it through referendum. You can do it through a parliament. You can do it through what we call it Majlis Ashura, the council of advisors or consultants. And those could be elected, or they can come there by virtue of their own merits. Maybe the first time we had institutions like this in the history are in Spain, during the Arab rule in Spain. But it has to be done this way, and consultation could be done in different forms. In the early days, they used to use the mosque for that purpose. And the ruler will stand up and talk to them, I want to do this. And they tell him no or yes, and they argue. And sometimes the mosque will be much smaller, so they go outside the city. Sometimes it takes them 3-4 days to reach a consensus or a general view before they do it. So there is no really defined method to say what is an Islamic state, and this is what should be really the case. But you have the main feature of the system.
Could I ask another question, just related? Is that okay? If you have a referendum, for example, that would be according to Islam. Would that include women as voters? I know that, I think in Kuwait, women still don't vote. Is that true?
Yeah, well, you know, women in the early days of Islam were really part of the society. You had women jurists, You had them leaders in the society. You had them even leading an army.
Yeah.
A woman, yes. And in the history, one of the cases I gave to my class is Umar, the second Caliph, when he stood up, and the Muslims became rich, not because of the oil wealth as it is today, but they became rich during his life. So men getting married, they started paying a huge amount of money, dowry we call it, to their wives. It was like a competition, a show off. Umar didn't like it. So he stood up, said, I'm going to pass a law to take back all this excessive amount of money and give it back to the husband so they don't do it again. There should be no competition in this area because the poor, they cannot do it. And the girls, they don't want to marry them. They want to marry the rich ones. A lady stood up and she said, Umar, you cannot do it. He said, why? And she recited to him a version from the Quran which does not allow a husband to take back from his wife anything he gave her. And Umar said, you are right. The lady is right and Umar is wrong. I'm giving this story to show you that the ladies in the old days of Islam were equal in the public affair of the society. Of course, we don't have referendum provided for in the Quran. We don't have a parliament. These things must be done according to the society. If you have a Muslim state in Africa, it's different from a Muslim state somewhere else. In Europe, maybe sometimes we have in Yugoslavia those who want to establish their Muslim states. There is a Muslim majority in some of the republics of Yugoslavia. Of course, you will apply something different there. In Saudi Arabia, with the huge tribes, it will be different from Egypt. We are so near, but the society is not the same in Saudi Arabia as it is. So you leave these things flexible. The constitutional law in Islam is so flexible, but they put the general rules, so to speak, the general guidelines, and leave it for every period, for every society to adapt itself within the framework of the general rules.
Thank you.
Aren't you tired? It's 9:30 almost. One more question?
One more question.
Here is Mr. Opik, my good friend.
Tell me, if you were one of the original prophets,
Prophets?
yes, that come down through all the centuries, would you be modern? Would you be old-fashioned? How would you treat this society today?
Maybe I answered this question to you, my good friend, in the hotel. But let me tell you something. I am not a prophet, and there will be no more prophets, thank God. And if I am a prophet, I will take my instructions from God. Well, I thank you very much for your patience, listening to me and asking your questions. I hope this is the beginning of some thoughts for you to read about those Muslims and the Muslim revivals. Now maybe you understand a little bit better about them than before. Thank you very much.